Steve Jobs changed the world forever, but the real story behind him is far more complex than most people realize. Because behind Apple, behind the innovation, behind the iconic products, there was a man driven by something much deeper than success. He was driven by obsession. Steve Jobs was born in 1955 and adopted shortly after birth. From the very beginning, his life carried a sense of separation. He grew up in California, in a middle-class family, surrounded by technology that was just beginning to shape the future. Even as a child, Jobs was not like others. He was highly intelligent, extremely curious, and often impatient with things he considered meaningless. While other kids followed instructions, Jobs questioned them. He wanted to understand how things worked, not just use them. That curiosity would define his entire life. In school, Jobs often felt misunderstood. He wasn't a traditional student. He wasn't focused on grades or structure. Instead, he explored electronics, design, and ideas that most teenagers didn't think about. He spent time in garages and workshops, learning how circuits worked, experimenting with small technical projects. This hands-on curiosity became the foundation of his future. Later, Jobs enrolled in college, but his time there would not last long. He dropped out after only a short period. On paper, it looked like failure. But for Jobs, it was a decision based on intuition. He didn't believe traditional education was giving him what he needed. Instead, he started attending random classes that interested him. One of those classes was calligraphy. At the time, it seemed completely unrelated to technology, but years later he would say that this experience shaped Apple's typography and design philosophy. It was one of those small moments that later changed everything. In the mid-1970s, Steve Jobs met Steve Wozniak. They were very different people. Wozniak was the engineer, technical, precise, focused on building. Jobs was the visionary, focused on design, simplicity, and emotion. Together, they created something powerful. In a small garage, they built the first Apple computer. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it had a vision behind it. The idea that computers could be personal, accessible, and beautiful. Apple quickly started to grow. What began as a small project became a company with massive potential, but success also brought pressure, and with pressure came conflict. Jobs became known for his extremely high standards. He demanded perfection, not as a preference but as a requirement. To some, this was inspiring. To others, it was overwhelming. He pushed people beyond what they thought was possible, and not everyone could handle it. Inside Apple, tensions began to rise. Jobs was deeply involved in product decisions, design choices, and long-term vision. But as the company grew, disagreements became more intense. Eventually, internal conflict reached a breaking point. In 1985, something unthinkable happened. Steve Jobs was removed from Apple, the company he founded. For most people, this would have been the end of the story. A painful exit, a public failure, a legacy interrupted. But for Jobs, it became something else entirely, a reset. After leaving Apple, Jobs didn't disappear. Instead, he started again. He founded a new company called Next. It focused on advanced computing and software systems. Although it wasn't a commercial success at the time, it was technologically influential. Because years later, Apple would actually use Next technology as the foundation for its comeback systems. At the same time, Jobs made another unexpected move. He invested in a small animation company called Pixar. At the time, Pixar was not the global giant it is today.
It was experimental, uncertain, and financially unstable. But Jobs believed in its potential, and over time, Pixar revolutionized animation with films like Toy Story. What seemed like a side investment became one of the most successful animation studios in history. Eventually, Apple found itself in trouble. The company that once defined innovation was struggling, and in a surprising turn of events, Apple invited Steve Jobs back. The man who was once removed was now returning. But this time, everything was different. Jobs returned with experience, perspective, and even stronger vision. He focused Apple's direction with extreme clarity, simplicity, design, innovation. He believed that technology should not only function well, it should feel intuitive and human. Under his leadership, Apple began to transform. The company released products that would change entire industries. The iMac redefined personal computing. The iPod changed how people listen to music. The iPhone completely reshaped the modern world. Each product wasn't just a device, it was an experience. But behind these achievements, there was constant pressure. Jobs was known for pushing teams extremely hard. Deadlines were strict, expectations were high, and perfection was non-negotiable. Some employees described working with him as inspiring. Others described it as exhausting. Both perspectives were true at the same time, because Steve Jobs didn't aim to be easy. He aimed to be exceptional, and that mindset created both innovation and conflict. Outside of Apple, his personality was also complex. He was private, intense, and deeply focused on his vision of the future. He didn't follow trends, he created them. In 2011, Steve Jobs passed away after a long battle with illness. But by that time, his impact on the world was already permanent. His ideas had reshaped technology, design, communication, and even culture itself. Today, Apple is one of the most valuable companies in the world. And Steve Jobs' influence can still be seen in every modern device we use. But the question remains, was he a genius who revolutionized technology, or a perfectionist whose demands pushed people beyond their limits? Maybe the truth is somewhere in between, because history is rarely simple, and people who change the world are almost never easy to define. Steve Jobs didn't just build products, he built expectations for what technology should be, and those expectations still define the world today. If there is one thing his story proves, it is that vision alone is not enough. It must be combined with obsession, and sometimes with sacrifice.